Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. NFL Divisional Preview Series comes to an end after today's fine program. 7 divisions down, 1 to go, and it is the NFC West to wrap things up. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, preview season is almost over. The regular season looms closer by the day.
That's a scary thought, because I'm gassed. It feels like we're about to record our Super Bowl podcast right now. That's how this feels.
That's not a positive admission right there. We're going to have you find your second win, and that second win's going to have to carry you 21 weeks to the finish line to get us through them handing out the Lombardi Trophy in New Orleans.
New Orleans. I'm not making that, are you?
I mean, I will be down there.
Corporate Todd has to be
from
there.
A media obligation standpoint, I will most likely be down there. It's a question of where we set up shop, but we got to get there first. You got to survive in advance, week in, week out. I'm not sure how Cajun food will do on the old system for 7 or 8 days, but we're still in the preseason. We can focus on the Super Bowl and the Chiefs three-peat in a little while. We'll have plenty of time to get to that, but the team...
You can plan your splurge. Are you going to do a little carbs there, the beignet with the powdery sugar? Is that your vibe?
Do you want me to try and figure that out 9 months in advance in terms of what I'm going to lay out day by day to make sure I get the beignets that done the right way, make sure I spend quality time at the casino down there, walk along Canal Street in the wee hours of the morning as well?
Yeah, I mean, you claim to be a scheduled guy. I don't know if that's true, but...
There is schedule. There is structure.
Now's a good time to prove
But
it.
I was going to say the middle of February is probably not high up on my docket. It's more trying to figure out what the next 2 weeks will look like as we get into our regular, traditional grind of the NFL and college football. So, all right, one division left to go. We'll kick things off in the NFC West with the Arizona Cardinals, who will look to improve on what was a dreadful 2023 campaign under first-year head coach Jonathan Gannon. When we look at Arizona, their win total sits at 7.5, heavily shaded to the under. They're more than a 3-1 underdog to make the postseason. If you believe they can go from worst to first and win the division, that price tag will pay you right around 15-1. And this is a Cardinals team, Payne, that comes into 2024 off back-to-back 4-13 seasons. It's the first time with that few wins in back-to-back seasons as a franchise going all the way back to the early 90s. I mean, this was a team, though, that looked a hell of a lot different and more buttoned up when Kyler Murray returned from that lower body injury. Thankfully for us and our listeners, they could have had a 5th win, missing a field goal in the final play of the regular season. It got us to the window. And when we look at Arizona, they addressed some of their deficiencies on the offensive side, drafting Marvin Harrison in the first round. Gone are Hollywood Brown and Rondale Moore as far as offensive weapons are concerned. Desmond Ridder dealt to the Atlanta Falcons. Desmond Ridder dealt to Arizona from the Atlanta Falcons. We'll see exactly how that unfolds, but preseason any indication. Clayton Tune will be the number 2. But when we're looking at this Arizona team offensively, Payne, Kyler Murray, we've talked about his durability being a major concern. This is a guy who, when he starts the regular season, is normally nicked up by the time he gets to week 10 or 11. But the floor isn't all that high for Arizona to improve on last year's campaign from an offensive side and what we saw from this team defensively as well.
Yeah, you mentioned getting our best bet home last season on the Cardinals under 4.5 wins, but that was...
Took some work.
Far more work than expected, right? And it's mostly because the offensive coordinator, Drew Petzing, exceeded every expectation. And you think about what he dealt with, right? You mentioned Kyler's injury history and their perceived franchise quarterbacks out 9 weeks, and Arizona then plays an above-average schedule of defenses, and Petzing's constantly having to create unique game plans around lesser talent because the Cardinals had the 5th most injured offense last season as well. And so you just kind of got glimpses of how good Petzing's offense could be, and I think that's the reason for optimism this season. And Arizona's caught steam all offseason, right? The win total opened as low as 5.5. We're now as high as like 7.1, and then we saw, a well-respected group not get the best number and still make a rare season-long play over 6.5 wins, and you're already seeing the week 1 market against Buffalo, partly a sell of the Bills, partly a buy in the Cardinals, but again, like market indicating positivity towards Arizona, and I think it's for good reason. Kyler Murray is polarizing, right? And he's back healthy right now. Our thoughts on Kyler are well documented. We've broken him down at the deepest levels, every aspect of his game, multiple times over the last few years, specifically in preview season. The issues are clear and obvious, but I think what's attractive is that pro bettors just need Kyler to exceed market expectation. They don't need him to be a franchise quarterback like the Cardinals front office or Cardinals fans hope he is. Our bar for Kyler is substantially lower. But I think you give Kyler a little bit of some credit last year. When he returned week 10, Arizona's offense made a massive leap. And that's a version of Kyler that's still acclimating to live bullets and game speed and probably not being 100% confident in his entire game, which requires a lot of mobility. The Cardinals were 9th in EPA per play with Kyler from week 10 through 18, 5th in yards per drive. The first 9 weeks without Kyler, Cardinals were 29th in EPA per play, 27th in yards per drive. So he made a clear impact. You look ahead to this season, the schedule of defenses Arizona projects to play is well below average. I thought one of the biggest question marks last year was the offensive line, and it was a pleasant surprise. It was supposed to be a weak link. It finished 6th in run block win rate, below average in pass protection. They let DJ Humphries walk, so you're looking at Paris Johnson right now starting at left tackle. He was serviceable as a rookie at right tackle. I think there's some questions there for sure. 6% pressure rate allowed on the right side. Struggled to get push in the ground game, but there were signs of clear improvement from week 10 onward for Paris. Evan Brown comes over from Seattle. Solid floor guy, versatile inside, can play either guard spot or snap it. And then you're looking, at Cardinals are starting Brown at left guard, Froholt at center, slightly above replacement level last season, but he's improved the last 5 games. And then you have Will Hernandez, who's a replacement level player at right guard, and then Jonah Williams comes over in free agency from Cincinnati. Hasn't really lived up to, I think, our perception of what he would be based upon his draft status, and he hasn't really played to the contract Arizona gave him the last 2 seasons. But when I look at him, he's certainly coming back from a couple injuries, had the dislocated kneecap, but I think a decent floor player. And that's kind of what you're going to get from this offensive line, is a decent floor. Your hope is that in a perfect world, you have some upside players along the offensive line. Paris Johnson, provides some upside, but on paper, you can't truly point out like a massive weak link. And offensive line sometimes, or most of the time, is really a weak link system. Defenses are just smart enough, savvy enough, creative enough to really capitalize if they find an area of weakness along that line. The weapons are exciting, right? I mean, 2 of the best in the entire league in terms of young talent with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. McBride is really interesting. I mean, I think fantasy guys are all over him this season, but for good reason. 26% target share once he became the Cardinals starting tight end. And for context, Evan Ingram led all tight ends last season at 24%. McBride finished only behind George Kittle in yards per route run among 46 qualifying tight ends. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., to me, is ready-made. I'm interested to see how high Marv's ceiling is, but he's one of the most polished rookie receivers ever, so the floor to contribute immediately is outstanding. Michael Wilson has flashed at times. Everyone kind of thinks he's going to be a breakout candidate, and I'm not disputing that. I just like him to win a bit more. Wilson was 134th in route win rate, won a route less than 30% of the time he ran one. Greg Dortch has actually been the star of Cardinals camp in the slot. Zay Jones, a nice veteran presence, a very nice option if Wilson can't make that leap outside, but he's suspended the first 5 games. And then the running back tandem, it's vastly different skill sets. James Conner, I don't know where he came from. right? Pittsburgh kind of washed their hands of him. He had the health scare, but he's revitalized his career in Arizona. I mean, the guy finished 5th in yards created among qualifying running backs last season, 2nd in yards per rush after first contact. It seems like their offensive system under Petzing is really looking like a lot of the core principles that made Cleveland so successful. Petzing is from that Stefanski tree. Connor is going to get the grimy yards, and then they go out and they draft Trey Benson in round 3. He's the opposite. He's the explosive home run hitter. If Benson is willing to take what he's given, the game takes a little bit of a step for him. But for me, Todd, stock arrow up on the Cardinals offense for sure.
Look, you highlighted some of the position players to be excited about and the weapons. If they can keep them healthy, it'll give Kyler Murray a few more toys to play with. And being a bye team, going to be very interesting to see what we get for the season opener against the Buffalo Bills, against a Bills defense that's going to be breaking in some new pieces and trying to figure out what that group looks like. So the potential does exist for Arizona to hit the ground running on that side of the ball. And quite frankly, Payne, they're going to have to, because defensively, when you look at Arizona, there is not a whole lot to be excited about, and injury concerns are already starting to mount. We know that they lost outside linebacker B.J. Ojulari for the season during a training camp practice with a knee injury. Darius Robinson, who they thought could have an instant impact, hurt his calf last week at practice, and Coach Gannon said he would have imaging done on Friday. Well, we've now come to find out he's going to miss multiple weeks rehabbing his calf. They did try and add some reinforcements through free agency. You bring in Justin Jones, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Bilal Nichols, Mac Wilson, spent 2 of their 3 top picks in terms of drafting defense. But look, this is a group that was rock bottom last year, and we're not saying that they have to jump into the top 10, but can they jump up 5 to 7 places and at least provide a semblance of resistance if this offense is going to be explosive?
Yeah, I mean, what you're insinuating and highlighting there, it's a big year for Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rawlis. The Cardinals have to show material improvement on the defensive side. And you think about the last 2 seasons and how we talk about Gannon a little bit as the guy who ran one of the Super Bowl's most historically horrific defenses and then followed it up by having the worst schedule-adjusted defense in Arizona last year. I think maybe, well, that's true, it's a little bit unfair, right? I mean, the Super Bowl is against Reed and Mahomes, and then last season the Cardinals defense gets an incomplete grade from me. I went back and listened to our defensive preview last year for the Cardinals. It was far and away the least talented defensive group in the entire league, and maybe that I've covered in the last decade. And on top of that, Arizona had the 2nd most injured defense and far away the most injured defensive line, a position group that we were kind of laughing about as we broke it down. So if it was horrific on paper to start, just imagine how the backups were. Unfortunately, you look at this season, Gannon is not going to be able to cheat his way to defensive improvement. Arizona projects to face the very toughest schedule of offenses this season. When I look at the roster, though, it feels like the floor of talent defensively has ticked up a little bit. You mentioned some of the guys along the defensive line. That was a group last year that finished 31st in yards per rush allowed before first contact. But some solid floor veterans were signed, right? Bilal Nichols, Justin Jones, both are overpays based on their lifelong data, but an improvement from what Arizona had. And if the Cards hit the lotto and Jones and Nichols play like their 2020 seasons, that'd be huge. Both are still in their prime at 28. Dennis Gardeck and Roy Lopez are back. Both played above replacement level last season with not much around them. If you look at Gardeck, came out of nowhere, 18% pressure rate. So good floor guys. Victor Diakeji was a pleasant surprise, 16% pressure rate on pass rush snaps from the outside linebacker spot. And you mentioned at the top, he's going to be needed. They're going to think more of him or need more from him because those young guys there are injured. B.J. Ojulari out for the year after tearing his ACL. Had a really nice rookie season, too. First-round pick. Darius Robinson is going to miss the start of the season with the calf strain. We know how tricky those are, right? Especially as an edge rusher, right? You got to get your get off. That's basically where your push is coming from. So those have a tendency to linger a little bit. Linebacker group, to me, has some talent. First-round pick Xavier Collins heads into year 4. He made a big jump last season in every single area after the team moved him from inside linebacker to outside linebacker, where a lot of the times he was lining up right on the edge, a lot of times standing up on the edge. Pressure rate wasn't great, 11% on pass rush snaps, but he set the edge real well, cleaned up his tackling, 6% missed tackle rate. And, it was pushing towards 16% his first 2 seasons. So Collins was athletic enough to kind of handle that transition. They used some drop coverage when Gannon and Rawls wanted to disguise some things. So a big year for Xavier Collins because they have not to this point picked up his 5th-year option. So we'll see how that trends. Kaiser White, solid vet, slightly better than replacement level guy. And it'll always be interesting, right, how much the linebacker play improves if the D-line improves, right, with fewer guys getting to him on the second level. Mack Wilson comes over from New England. Last 4 seasons, he hasn't really been more than a rotational piece. His play's been very inconsistent, but he played extremely well last season in a 300-snap role. Secondary should improve if the front 7 is better on early downs, right? The Cardinals were dead last in early down EPA surrendered, so it makes it tough as a defensive back when the opposing coordinator has the entire playbook at his disposal because every down is basically, run-pass option, and that led to the Cardinals secondary dead last finish, 32nd in EPA per dropback allowed. So you look at some guys that they've added, Sean Murphy-Bunting, 5-year vet, but he's still in his prime. I think if Gannon can replicate Bunting's 2022 season, there's going to be a little bit of value there in that signing. You go back to 2022, he allowed 4.2 yards per target, regressed in a big way for the Titans last season. Then you have second-round pick Max Melton battling for the starting corner job opposite Bunting. It's interesting because he hasn't been great in limited preseason snaps. He wasn't elite at Rutgers, just very good, has the right mentality. Garrett Williams, 3rd-round pick out of Syracuse last season, is an interesting player. Didn't see his first snaps until week 7 last year, but it gave up 6.2 yards per target allowed from the slot, which is a really nice number. Played really well except for the 49ers game in week 15, but there's a lot of chatter about Williams being under the radar. And then you have Jalen Thompson and Budda Baker at safety, a nice little duo there. Thompson is the leader, 73 passer rating allowed. When closest in coverage last year, single-digit missed tackle rate. Budda Baker battled injuries last season. He's, at this point better as a box safety than a cover man, but he's improving in that area. And then you look, it's a contract year for Budda, so some added incentive there. So, when I kind of look at this, it's certainly not going to be a good defense, but we talk all the time about taking steps, right? And if the Cardinals can go from the worst defense by a mile to somewhere in that 22 to 26 range, that's massive. And, Gannon and Rawls are creative with their coverages. They game plan to opponent. There are variance metrics that can only improve. The Cardinals were dead last in the green zone, dead last on 3rd down, so you'd think maybe a little uptick in those areas. But week 1, you mentioned, is kind of going to be a fantastic barometer to gauge the Cardinals' improvement up front because the Bills like their offensive line. They're going to want to run the ball. So that is going to be a good test week 1 to kind of figure out where that defensive line is at and if it's improved against the run.
May have to try and figure out a way we can publish the Payne projection schedule in terms of how tiers look. There's rock bottom is where Arizona was, slightly less than rock bottom, well below average, average, and then you can start to make those positive strides into plus territory. So for the overarching point with this Arizona defense, I think when you nailed it, talking about how this group, as long as they're not 32nd in most key categories, just getting up into the mid to high 20s shows a level of improvement with a defensive-minded head coach that might allow them to win a few more football games than what we saw last year. A team that surprised a lot of folks a season ago, Payne, was the Los Angeles Rams. And as a result, you see their win total taking a little bit of over money. 8.5 shaded to the over right now in that $1.50, $1.60 range. This is a team who's right around even money to make the playoffs. And if you believe they can win the division, you're talking about a price tag north of 3-1. As far as some of the personnel moves that the Rams made this offseason, additions, you bring in Jimmy Garoppolo, who suspended the first 2 games. That'll assume the QB2 role ahead of Stetson Bennett. Colby Parkinson comes over to help with some of the tight end depth as Tyler Higbee recovers from his torn up knee. Defensively, some familiar faces in new places. Darius Williams from the Jags, Cameron Curl from the Commanders. Trey White comes over from Buffalo looking to resurrect his career, and Jonah Jackson along the offensive line. And as far as the draft was concerned, a couple of names you're familiar with in Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. Why are those players important? Because when we're talking about subtractions, I can rattle off a number of names, but the only one that really matters is Aaron Donald deciding to hang it up. And it was a tale of two seasons for the Rams last year. Started the campaign 3-6, finished 7-1 down the stretch. Replacing Aaron Donald, though, no easy task for this team defensively. The other storyline that started to brew for them, we'll get to that in a minute. Ernest Jones, the defensive play caller, talking about a trade. The Rams have granted him permission to explore that particular option, and we'll see how the Rams fare. But when you have a consummate professional under center, Payne, with Matthew Stafford, and you look at the numbers he put forth when Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua were all on the field together, you can understand why people are optimistic about what Sean McVay can do with an offense that really found its identity coming out of the bye when he made some well-timed tweaks to their offensive capabilities.
Puka who?
Puka Nacua.
Okay.
Puka Nuka.
Yeah. By the way, this McVay guy, quarterback savant, all my favorites in one room. Big surprise there, huh?
I mean, look, Stetson showed market improvement throughout the course of the preseason, but, I thought he was going to have to fend off a challenge from a quarterback I had never heard of who started their preseason finale in dress or win, but did just enough to get the Rams across the finish line as live underdogs.
Game-winning drive. He's got moxie, that kid. Okay. To me, the Rams are, again, very tough to gauge because I think you outlined everything perfectly that, I'm trying to retrace my steps here and think about this out loud. It's like last year we did our off-season podcast. It was in May. We gave out under 7.5 wins on the Rams, and nobody with market influence bought the dip and went against us. The Rams closed 6.3 heading into last season, and I think every reason for playing the Rams under was bang on accurate through 10.5 weeks. I mean, the Rams were 3-6 to start the season, and you think about 2 of those 3 wins. They come in overtime, one of them against rookie Anthony Richardson, who was 11 for 25 that day. That's what it took to win in overtime, is the opposing quarterback going 11 for 25. And then it was the Arizona Cardinals.
We did have the Rams that day ourselves,
yes,
so I was okay with Anthony Richardson going 11 for 25 that Sunday afternoon.
That's true. And so, like, those are the 2 of the 3 wins early on. I mean, after week 1, it was ugly. Matthew Stafford looked washed. He was QB 27 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation through 10 weeks. Cooper Kupp looked washed, right? You look at his numbers from week 7 through 13. Kupp averaged 0.9 yards per route run. They come out of the bye. It's week 11. They're at home. They're trailing Seattle 13-0 at home. I mean, the season is over at that point, and somehow McVay finagled enough offense. Geno got injured. Seattle misses a game-winning field goal at the buzzer, and instead of 3-7, season over, the Rams are 4-6, and the rest of their schedule is relatively soft. Cardinals, Commanders, Saints, Giants, Browns, and Flacco's very first start of the year. Week 18 was a throwaway game. The 49ers and Rams both played backups. The one really good team post-bye beat the Rams. Now, sure, like, you look at the Rams, they played Baltimore extremely well, probably should have won that game, and, the down-to-down stuff certainly improved, but there was a lot of good fortune along the way and perfect timing, and you mentioned some of those changes, and I think you do have to credit Sean McVay, and that's ultimately what happens when you fade good coaches. Eventually, they get it figured out. Right, it might take them a month, might take them 2 months, and so there were some tweaks made post-bye, and there's a reason McVay's a Super Bowl winner and a well-respected offensive mind, and I think he understood a few things that I wouldn't say were obvious, but his offensive line was struggling to protect, and Matthew Stafford came into last season beat up, right, elbow, shoulder, multiple concussions, right, and the Rams were bottom 10 in pass block win rate the first 10 weeks, and Stafford was battling through these injuries, and so McVay just put less stress on him, right? Shortened the ADOT, especially on early downs. Throwing shorter passes also meshed better when you think about the weapons you have, right? 31-year-old Cooper Kupp, who ran 4.6 in his prime, probably wasn't running that then. And then even though Puka is a standout rookie, he runs 4.6. So there's like no reason having Stafford sit behind a line, not giving him time, having him stress the elbow and shoulder, throwing deep to receivers that aren't overly fast. And so that was one of the adjustments. And then McVay just went super aggro with all of the cheat codes we talk about with motion and play action. And while it sounds minimal collectively, those were the adjustments post-bye, and you couple those tweaks with, again, the decrease in schedule strength, and the Rams offense got back on track. Matthew Stafford improved. From week 11 onward, Stafford was 8th in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. Now, when I look this season, what's the offensive plan? Right? Is it back to what you did Super Bowl season? Or is it start how you finished last year? And so I think about it like if defenses are cognizant of those changes that the Rams made post-bye and adjust, then what? Like, are you able to go back to what brought you to the Super Bowl with that deep down the field passing attack? I don't know if the pieces are there at their current age. What we do know is the offseason for the Rams hasn't been great. Matthew Stafford is now nursing a hamstring issue this camp. We know the elbow to some degree is something he's always going to have to manage. And regardless of what you read or hear on Matthew Stafford, there's a reason the Rams front office hasn't bumped Stafford's contract up with more guarantees, longevity to the contract, right? And this is as the QB market is currently soaring. So there is even some hesitation internally. Kyren Williams has dealt with a foot injury this offseason. He's going to be fine week 1. But there's been some hints about load management. That's obvious when you see their plans, right? Draft Blake Corum in round 3. To me, when I look at him and I see what he did in Michigan, he's kind of an innings eater, right, so to speak. And I think it's tough to envision Kyren finishing second in EPA per rush, second in success rate again. And there's a gentleman who I stumbled upon. His name's Jason Katz, fantasy guy. He performed a study on running backs that went from 0 to hero. And the sample size is small, but there's been 17 running backs the last 15 seasons to go from waiver wire pickup to top 24 pick the following season. Of those 17 backs, exactly 0% of them exceeded expectation. 24% met expectation, 47% fell below expectation, and 29% totally crapped out.
0 is not a good number. I don't have to be a math wizard to figure out, but 0% is never a good thing.
Now, I don't think Kyren Williams goes back to being a waiver wire 0, but the foot, Blake Corum, the data, and then the fourth layer is the Rams faced the very easiest schedule of run defenses last season. That jumps to above average this season, so I think you're going to see a little bit of a pullback on Kyren Williams. Puka should be good for week 1, but he's dealing with a knee injury. Tyler Higbee tore his ACL and MCL in January. There's a reason Colby Parkinson was signed. Certainly a better blocker than pass catcher. I would think with Higbee down, the Rams continue using gobs of 3 wide receiver sets. Demarcus Robinson is set to have a career year, barring health. With those shorter passes I mentioned earlier, Tutu Atwell, the Rams' main deep threat, saw his snap share decrease, and Demarcus Robinson was the beneficiary of that. From week 12 onward, Robinson averaged 4 catches a game, 55 yards, and basically 2/3 of a touchdown per game. Offensive line, to me, a little bit of a mixed bag. Rob Havenstein continues to be a damn good right tackle, but he's 32. Kevin Dotson's coming off a career year. That was completely out of left field, so you'd project some regression there. Jonah Jackson, that was the splash free agent signing on offense. He's battling a shoulder injury. He's missed virtually all of camp, and for the money, another contract that felt a touch high. Jonah allowed a 6% pressure rate last season, below replacement level in the run game. And then you have starting left tackle, Alaric Jackson. He's suspended 2 games. Very inconsistent when he's out there. Elite in some games, massive liability in others. 7% pressure rate allowed last season. Doesn't offer much in the ground game either. Then you have Steve Avila is moving from guard to center. Did play center at TCU in 2020 and 2021, but he's talked about that transition being a little bit of a bear for him this season. So, for me, when I look at this offense, you never discount what McVay can come up with. There is clearly some premium talent, but the schedule of defenses the Rams face go from bottom 10 to above average. Top 5 schedule of passing defenses that Stafford, Puka, and Kupp have to deal with. This, to me, just feels a little bit like a middling team, and if the coaching is fantastic and everyone hits their ceiling again, maybe it's another 10-11 win team that just doesn't have enough juice to actually be a a true contender in the NFC. That's kind of how I'm viewing this. But you just start thinking about, it's like, there's been a lot of problems along the offensive line in camp so far. Is Puka just going to have another career year again? Right? That was such an anomaly as a rookie. But I would think with Stafford and McVay, there's not going to be a ton of drop off. Like, what is Cooper Kupp right now? Kyron is clearly going to have some level of regression. So it's very tough to gauge this. But again, with McVay, there's certainly a floor. And it's just a matter of what he can concoct, and hopefully everyone stays healthy enough and reaches their peak simultaneously again.
If the offense maintains the level that we saw late in the season for this Rams group, there's no doubt that they can have a chance to flirt with another postseason berth to try and get there, but the defense is going to have to do their part as well, and it's going to look a little bit different under the leadership of new defensive coordinator Chris Shula, who takes over for Raheem Morris. Of course, Morris, the new head coach for the Atlanta Falcons. When you look at what the Rams did, they drafted 5 defensive players in their first 6 picks. They knew this is a side of the ball that's been relatively neglected over the last couple of years, as they've traded most of their draft capital for some impact players to get them across the finish line. And after the retirement of Aaron Donald, the Rams will now roster the least expensive defense in the entire league. Talked about it at the top, adding Jared Verse and Braden Fisk in the draft. The Ernest Jones drama, Payne, I mean, he's a guy who logged 900-plus snaps in 15 games last year, led the team with 20 run stuffs. That was a team best and 4th amongst all linebackers, but we know how the Rams have kind of approached offering these extensions and granting him permission to explore deals. They either feel he's not worth the money or there are capable replacements there. I mean, this is a Rams team that's going to look different. Now, credit to them. We saw a couple of guys that weren't expected to do much in Kobe Turner and Brian Young combined for 17 sacks. Much easier to do when every other opposing offense is preoccupied with slowing down the big man who can create that internal pressure in Aaron Donald. Doing this division, this was the one unit of all the teams we're going to talk about, both offense and defense, that left me kind of painted in a corner figuring out what this group is going to be, with so many unproven commodities and without the face of the franchise that has been the one common denominator for all these Rams defensive efforts over the last decade.
As I was breaking down the defense, and you go by player, by position, by unit, and now that you put it that way, I kind of agree. There's always, hey, this looks okay, but there's a question mark. And so I think you again hit it perfectly, and that's what happens when you're changing a lot on defense. You mentioned the coordinator change, the loss of Aaron Donald. I think specific to coordinator, these are always the toughest evals because Shula's been in the Rams organization through multiple coaching staffs since 2017. So it's hard to attribute specific contributions to be like, hey, this is going to be easy, right? When you bounce around from spot to spot, it's a little bit easier to identify, hey, he left this group, they regressed, he went to this group that was shit, he improved them, right? It's much easier that way, kind of formulating a real thought of what these coaches are, but this one is a little bit tougher. Now he's going to keep the core principles and philosophies the same, but there's going to be tweaks based on personnel, and if you've listened to Shula, he continually says it's about the players and that he's going to mold to the talent. The Aaron Donald conversation is obvious, right? He's one of the greatest defensive players ever. Even at age 32 last year, he led all interior linemen in pass rush win rate despite facing a double team on 63% of snaps. You look for his career, 15% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, single-digit career missed tackle rate, elite run defender, despite being an undersized defensive tackle, right? I mean, it was going like 280, 285 in season, which is crazy to think about, being a really, really good run defender. But so to me, when you kind of outline this, you're right. It's not just about replacing Aaron Donald's production, but every single offense spent every week figuring out how to prevent Aaron Donald from wrecking their game plan. So inherently, right, that means lots of plus EV situations for other defenders up front. If Donald's being double teamed and in some instances triple teamed, other guys are operating one-on-one or getting completely clean looks. So that's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. Now, there's lots of young guys up front. Everyone knows about Puka's career year as a rookie, but you mentioned the two guys on defense, Kobe Turner and Byron Young, as well. Now, Kobe Turner, to me, is a guy that I watched play at Wake Forest, and I was like banging the table that this guy needs to be drafted much higher. So, while the production was quite a surprise, I figured he would still be very good. But, I mean, these numbers were ridiculous. Turner finished 16th in pass rush win rate among interior linemen. Turner actually saw a higher double team rate than Aaron Donald, if you can believe it. He was also a plus player against the run. Byron Young is interesting because everyone thinks this is going to be the breakout season. Now, certainly the talent's there. He added 10 pounds. He's up to 260. He's timing faster as well, so it's been good weight. The pressure rate has to increase, though, for me to think that the sacks stay the same. 9% pressure rate on pass rush snaps last year for Young, so that's got to tick up. I think you mentioned 5 of the first 6 picks in April's draft were on defense. 4 of those 5 were along the defensive line, and it starts with Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, pick 19 and 39. Verse has had a monster camp so far. Braden Fisk absolutely tore up the combine. He's back in action after dealing with an eye injury earlier in camp, caught a thumb to the eye. And then they went out and added Brennan Jackson and Tyler Davis, both up front as well. Linebacker group, I think the best way to talk about it is it's a fluid situation. And you saw the news break over the weekend that the Rams are allowing Ernest Jones to seek a trade. This is a guy we identified, if you remember.
Yeah, you called him out before anybody else had talked about the kind of value he added, especially in coverage.
He is a defensive leader. He is the green dot. He is a tone setter, and he's been an absolute menace playing downhill. 28% tackle rate on all run snaps faced last year. It was number 1 among qualifying backers. 26% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, so a fantastic blitzer. Single-digit missed tackle rate all 3 seasons in the league. Improved in coverage back last year, right? It was 6.5 yards per target allowed. Part of the reason for this is I have been told the Rams believe they've hit on Omar Speights.
He's the buzz guy. Everything you read talking about Speights this, Speights that. I don't buy into the depth chart where he's listed 3rd by most major websites right now.
He has been a beast in preseason. He's clearly savvy. Now he was just an above-average player in college. But what he's done so far in the preseason has been unreal. And so it's a big risk to take, right? If Speights isn't quite ready when the real bullets are coming at him, right? This becomes a real area of concern if it's just Omar Speights and they allow Jones to walk, because the rest of the room is, it's Troy Reeder, it's Christian Roseboom, it's Jake Hummel. They're all undrafted free agents. They have 11 seasons of combined playing experience, averaging about 256 snaps per season as a trio. And that tells you what? That they've been around long enough, but haven't been good enough to earn full-time roles. Elias Neal is an undrafted rookie. Hasn't been good in preseason. So you can see why Jones Camp wants to leverage this right now. When you look at the rest of the room, secondary has new pieces. Tre'Davious White signed a 1-year incentive-based deal. If he plays 60% of the Rams' defensive snaps, his contract goes from $3.25 million to $8.5 million. Part of the reason he came here is some of the Bills players had previously been in LA, right? Think Leonard Floyd. The surgeon that operated on White's Achilles is the Rams team physician, so he felt comfortable there. Darius Williams returns to LA after a career year in Jacksonville, 69 passer rating allowed when closest defender in coverage. Moneyball signing with Cameron Curl, 4 years of plus safety play for the Commanders, had a monster 2022 season. Quentin Lake showed extremely well in the slot last season, 5.8 yards per target allowed. And then you have John Johnson, veteran safety scheme fit. His play the last 3 seasons hasn't been close to how he played from 2017 to 2020 for the Rams. He was much better in that first stint in LA. And then you have Cam Kitchens, has a really nice rookie camp so far. So, when you look at this, I think going back to your overarching point, there are a lot of unknowns. And it's based upon what version of Tre'Davious White are the Rams getting. Right? Darian Kendrick, an 800-snap corner, tore his ACL in July. Darius Williams is dealing with a hamstring injury right now that he's been rehabbing for the last month. He's increasing the workload in hopes of being ready for opening night against the Lions. We'll see. There's just extreme variance with the Rams secondary. But it just feels like there's questions at each level, right? Are the young kids along the D-line ready to be the focal point without Aaron Donald, right? Does Ernest Jones' agent find a trade partner? And the secondary, to me, if you said, hey, this is, Tre'Davious White returns to form, there's no regression for Darius, the Moneyball signing Cam Curl is perfect. You could tell me, hey, this is a top 10 secondary.
It's an interest,
but it's most likely White, probably not going to be that guy anymore, right? And Darius is probably going to regress some. And so if you said, hey, this is a bottom 10 secondary, it'd be the least shocking thing. And then you just think about it. On top of all this, the Rams project to face a top 5 schedule of offenses, top 5 schedule of passing offenses. So, there's some questions here for sure.
It's an interesting team, and you're going to get both ends of the spectrum. For the Rams, pretty early on in the campaign, Sunday Night Football, they'll be under the bright lights as they head back to Detroit to take on the Lions as slightly more than a field goal underdog in that game. They'll follow it up week 2 on the road against a team that they should be able to slice and dice, and we'll see what the defense can do against a division rival in the Arizona Cardinals before they finally come home. But I know the Rams, a team getting a lot of buzz, people talking about them as a potential sleeper in the NFC. A lot of things have to go right on both the offensive and defensive side if the Rams are to scratch the surface of the team that we saw down the stretch last year, not the team that started without much of an offensive identity. If you're talking about identity, this podcast has one, and it's because of the people that you follow on this very fine program. You, of course, can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. And most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter delivered right to your inbox every single Friday throughout the course of football season. The links are available on all of our social media feeds. And one thing I want to remind all of you that haven't already signed up, or maybe some of you that have, mark the email addresses of bettheboardpodcast@gmail.com and info@bettheboardpodcast.com as safe addresses. That way, that letter will get to your main inbox. It won't end up in spam. And be making sure that you're paying attention to all the different folders that are out there. We know we've had a lot of you guys and girls reach out saying, yep, you haven't received the newsletter, only to find it sitting in the spam. And if you could also take a second and forward the newsletter to friends, family, coworkers. Word of mouth, always one of the most valuable vehicles we take advantage of. There's a reason we've been an independent podcast for over 10 years now, and it's because you, all of our loyal listeners, help spread the gospel of what kind of football content you can expect on the NFL and college side all fall long. From the Rams to the 49ers, Payne, as we move up the California coast, and when we look at this 49ers...
Oh, no.
I'm afraid.
The Chiefs signed Juju.
They did sign Juju.
Okay.
To try and help their receiving room.
Who knows?
I was going to ask, what does that tell us about anything else that may be going on?
I have no idea. I guess just bring him back on a cheap deal. Who knows?
You don't sound overly thrilled.
I mean, look, the writing was on the wall. We did the Patriots preview, and we're like, yeah, they're phasing him out, and 6 days later he's gone. So I don't know what he has left in the tank. Maybe a suspension's coming. We'll see. So I was told, and this could be completely wrong, that a lot of people are talking about the Rice suspension being more of a 2025 thing than a 2024 thing. Why does that not even sound? Because
the NFL likes to let the legal situation play out first for these kind of situations. And if Rice doesn't actually have his court date until much later in the year, that the league may have to wait to try and dole out what they deem to be justice by their off-field conduct policy. So there is a possibility that the can may get kicked down the proverbial road.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it may allow the Chiefs to win their third straight Super Bowl, and Rashee Rice will just be sidelined in their quest to win the fourth in a row.
I think they'll be okay with that.
The 49ers win total, this is a number that's been on the move, depending on where you shop around, though. 11.5 shaded to the under. We've seen the juice start to get slightly more expensive. As far as their price to make the playoffs, they are overwhelming favorites to get back to the postseason, and quite overwhelming favorites, second most expensive division favorite, behind only the aforementioned Kansas City Chiefs there. And when we look at this 49ers team from top to bottom, some additions along the defensive line, Leonard Floyd Floyd, Yetur Gross-Matos, Devondre Campbell brought in from the Green Bay Packers, Malik Collins defensively. As far as offense was concerned, a couple of familiar faces there as well, drafting Ricky Pearsall and Renardo Green. As far as players no longer with the team, Eric Armstead along that D-line, Sam Darnold taking over as QB1 in Minnesota, no Charlie Werner, Chase Young, Randy Gregory, and Javon Kinlaw. And Payne, before we get into the offense and defense, I mean, this is a 49ers offseason that it's been drama. We continue to await news about Brandon Ayuk and what's going to happen there. Trent Williams' contract remains unresolved. And judging by the reports we saw this morning, he hasn't even blinked. So it's a question of who will do that first between him and the organization. You did see a little bit of injury concern in their final preseason game. Leonard Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos with sprained knees. Floyd appears to be day-to-day. Gross-Matos could be out a little bit longer. And if the 49ers are going to become the fourth team to lose the Super Bowl and then win the Super Bowl the following season, they're going to need all of these situations rectified. But fortunately for them, they have a head coach in Kyle Shanahan who gets the most out of his roster. He's led the 49ers to 4 conference championship games and 2 Super Bowls in his 7 seasons as a head coach. The numbers speak for themselves in terms of what he's able to manufacture in terms of yards per play and yards per attempt among head coaches in the Super Bowl era who've coached 100 games. He is first, but he is still trying to erase that one blank that remains on the resume, that, of course, being a Super Bowl crown. If he's going to do so, Payne, offensively, Brock Purdy will be his man, and we'll figure out exactly what some of those weapons and the offensive line structure will look like. Maybe not until we see that team unveiled for their season opener on Monday Night Football against the New York Jets in 2 weeks from today.
So, Super Bowl runner-up favorite again in the NFC. I think we can be a little more concise with the 49ers just because it's so straightforward and specific to the offense. You mentioned Brock Purdy, and you look at his game, right? He's improved by leaps and bounds last season, and the offense stayed healthy, and everything clicked, and the 49ers they were an offensive juggernaut, basically. If you look at early downs, first 3 quarters, the 49ers were number 1 in EPA per play, nearly doubling the second best offense. All downs adjusted for schedule, the 49ers are the most efficient offense by a wide margin over the Dolphins and Bills and Ravens and Lions. And right now, every single starter on offense is back. So it's Super Bowl or bust. And you're looking at the window, it's starting to close because Brock Purdy's going to want a new contract here pretty soon. And, for me, when I look at this, the entire 2024 49ers season's about 2 things. It's player availability, and if some of the players aren't available, holdouts, trade, injury, can Brock Purdy make another leap? And I was thinking about this the other day, and it just kind of, as I look at the maturation, it's like rookie year, Purdy's a system fit, and he's being elevated by system and surrounding talent. Year 2, Brock becomes kind of an elite distributor. But if it's not picture perfect around him, there's still some questions, right? And then now it's year 3, like, can Brock get to a level where his play raises everyone around him, where Brock's kind of the lead in the show now? And I think that is the big question here. If Ayuk continues to hold out or gets traded, is it business as usual, right? If Trent Williams holds out or gets injured, right, does Brock keep rolling? And I think you hit the Trent Williams thing bang on the head. Like he's willing to wait because he knows his value and he knows what's along this offensive line without him. Right? If Debo goes down, right, does the offense skip a beat, or can Brock get to that level where he's raising the bar for everyone else and there isn't this drop off? That wasn't the case. We saw it last year in Cleveland. Debo goes down and all of a sudden, Brock Purdy just isn't that dude for a couple of games. I'm not sure how much of a thing the CMC calf injury is, but similar situation. If CMC misses a few games, can the offense survive because, Brock elevates his game? And as we record this, on the morning of 8/26, right, there's just not much resolution. Ayuk's still holding out. We all thought things were getting closer. And now the Commanders have entered the picture. The organization isn't happy with how Ayuk's gone about this, right? He's handled it wildly different than Debo handled his contract issue. And Ayuk is vital to this offense, and the data proves it. The The 49ers offense basically becomes a phone booth offense when Ayuk is not on the field. The depth of target drops nearly 3 yards. And when defenses don't have to worry about Ayuk, it then impacts the run game. Yards per rush dip 1.3 yards the last 2 seasons when Ayuk is not on the field. And so that's, for those kind of on the outside, why isn't this getting done? That's the internal battle going on. The 49ers obviously don't want to spend a ton of money because they've kind of top-loaded their roster, and then Brock is coming due. And so they're trying to pitch, hey, look at Ayuk's baseline stats. They don't equal 38 million, 40 million, whatever he's looking for a year. And Ayuk's representation is saying, yeah, but we don't pass the ball enough. Just look at the efficiency numbers. And that's kind of the internal battle on placing Ayuk at a designated price. Is Ayuk 28 to 31? And that's kind of what the 49ers are trying to suggest, and Ayuk saying, hey, more of like a 35 million plus kind of receiver a year. And then you have one of the most dominant tackles in the history of the league, Trent Williams, holding out. If there was a game played today, Jalen Moore would be the 49ers starting left tackle. And Moore's given up a 14% pressure rate this preseason on 44 pass blocking reps. You look at the rest of the offensive line, they thought the depth was a little bit better. John Feliciano needed a knee procedure. Spencer Burford is trying to expedite his return after breaking his hand. Aaron Banks broke his finger. He's trying to fight his way back for the opener. So there's just not a lot of depth along the 49ers offensive line. Fortunately, you have a rookie in Dominic Pooney, who has been a revelation, going to start day one at right guard. We go back to Debo. Can he stay healthy? First-round pick, Ricky Pearsall, dealing with a shoulder injury. He's returned to practice, but it just feels like a situation where, is he going to be able to play through this? The 49ers knew he had a shoulder injury. They thought he was going to be able to get through his rookie season, and then they could do the surgery in the offseason, but it just became too much to where they gave him a couple weeks off, hoping that it would help things. Let's see. Now, the guys I talked to in that building are extremely high on Jacob Cowing. So let's see if he contributes as a rookie, if someone goes down, or if Ayuk's holding out, or if he just overtakes Jennings altogether. But Cowing has flashed all camp, so that would be a nice positive if this receiver core isn't what it is on paper. Defensively, to your point, it's somewhat similar. Dre Greenlaw won't be around after tearing his Achilles in the Super Bowl. The goal is to have him 100% healthy heading into the playoffs. Hufanga is progressing to dynamic cuts, still no contact with other players on the field. You mentioned Leonard Floyd and Gross Matos. Fortunately, those injuries aren't as serious as initially suspected, but that duo, it has to be 100% just to kind of alleviate the pressure from Nick Bosa seeing incessant double teams. And you look, Bosa saw the 4th highest rate of double teams last season. Gross Matos looks like he's going to miss the opener, if not a few weeks. And then Leonard Floyd escaped serious injury. Basically, you said day to day. Shanahan says, hey, I think we expect him to play week 1 against the Jets. Let's monitor that. Floyd's interesting because he just seems to find the quarterback. The pressure numbers are solid, but not elite. 10.5% the last 2 seasons, but somehow 21 sacks. In addition to Floyd, I do like the other veteran presences brought in, right? Malik Collins finished 12th in pass rush win rate among defensive tackles. Devondre Campbell hasn't returned to his 2021 anomaly season, but he's been good. Smart veteran, should fill the void until Greenlaw returns. What I am interested to see, though, Todd, defensively, is if there's some regression. On the surface, you look last year, 4th in schedule-adjusted efficiency on all downs. 17th on early downs. This is a damn good defense. In fact, I like some of the defensive line pieces better this season than last, but the early down numbers weren't nearly as good as the overall picture. The last time we watched this defense, they couldn't get a critical stop. You also look at some of the data, and we are not huge, trends rather. Not a huge trend guy. This is not the Trend Podcast. We understand what some of the Super Bowl runners-ups have done. The last 23 have underachieved the following year by a wide margin relative to market expectation, right? And the market expectation for these Super Bowl runners-up have them priced at an average of 10.5 wins the following season. 6 overs, 15 unders, 2 pushes. And the 49ers market expectation isn't 10.5 like the average has been for the Super Bowl runner-up. It's 11.5 this season. So we're starting to see some real money trickle in on the 49ers under here.
You can understand why the skepticism is there with all the questions they have to answer going into the season, and the 49ers not going to judge the merits of a successful campaign by necessarily just winning the division. It's Super Bowl or bust in the Bay Area, as that window is rapidly closing, given the time to pay the piper should Brock Purdy get his big deal and a variety of other players. Last but not least, when we wrap up the NFC West, Payne, we head further up the coast to Seattle and look at a Seahawks win total that is 7.5, shaded to the over. We've seen this total take a little bit of over money, drifting out a bit depending on the shop. They're still underdogs to make the playoffs in that plus 160 or better range, depending on where you shop, and third favorites in the division, price tags north of 6-1. And when you begin to look at the Seahawks, the most notable change for them, Pete Carroll no longer the head coach. Mike McDonald comes over to take that mantle. They go from having the oldest head coach in the National Football League to having the youngest. In terms of personnel additions, Jerome Baker, Rayshawn Jenkins, Sam Howell, George Fant, Terrell Dodson, a lot of defensive difference makers potentially in that mix. And as far as players that we've grown accustomed to seeing wearing Seattle colors, Drew Lock, Will Dissly, Colby Parkinson, Damian Lewis, Jordan Brooks, Bobby Wagner, and Jamal Adams, all off to different spots. Ryan Grubb, new offensive coordinator, familiar with the Pacific Northwest, having led a national championship runner-up offense on Kalen DeBoer's staff. Aiden Durd takes over as defensive coordinator there. And this is a Seahawks team last year was pretty simple and straightforward. When they played teams that had a bad passing attack, they won games. When they played teams that could throw the forward pass, it was a real struggle. We've also seen the Seahawks continue to be active in the trade market. Darrell Taylor traded, Michael Jackson brought in, Tevin Gibson brought in earlier this morning on Monday. And this will be a Seahawks team that has a chance to start quickly with 4 of 6 games at home, including being listed as favorites in 3 of their first 5 contests. Payne offensively last year, Shane Waldron clearly didn't get the most out of this group, was dealing with a banged up offensive line from start to finish, and you always talk about the delta between being protected as a quarterback versus under duress, and Geno Smith was the perfect illustration of a quarterback. When he was dealing with pressure, he was not going to be able to achieve results even with a bevy of playmakers at his disposal.
Yeah, I think this is it's a really interesting offense because we're higher on Ryan Grubb than I think a lot of people. I mean, he's one of the hottest offensive names in football right now from the savvy faction of the internet. A lot of data guys understand what he means. He's been Kalen DeBoer's right-hand man at multiple stops. There was initial concern at Alabama, right, when Grubb chose Seattle over the Tide. And he just kind of runs this modern pro-style offense. So it kind of fits both aspects of what it sees defensively right now. It's really interesting. And through just a couple preseason games, you can see the intent, right? Motion rates are through the roof. More 3 wide receiver sets, which is actually going to allow Seattle to get value from its 2023 first-round pick, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Seattle only played 3 receiver sets at the 19th highest rate the first 3 quarters last season. There is a nice mix of RPO and screen game, so it kind of keeps defenses on their heels there, but I would expect Geno Smith to throw deeper more often this year. If you look last year, only 27% of Geno's passes traveled 10-plus yards. Grubb, if you've listened to him talk, he is a Geno Smith believer. You can just see how he talks about him, the tone in which he talks about Geno. The other players call Geno a leader on offense. So, I mean, Grubb likes that Geno can do a little bit of everything, right? The arm is strong enough. He's accurate enough. He's mobile enough. He's smart enough to know the protections and get the team lined up pre-snap. So, Geno is good enough at just about everything that will allow Grubb to run an offense that's deceptive, that can attack all parts of the field with really different styles and tempos. It's a fun offense to watch. So I would expect more passing this season with Metcalf, Lockett, JSN, and Fant. And when Seattle goes 3 wide, it'll be more efficient year over year because that's Grubb's specialty, right? Last year, when they tried running 3 wide, it just wasn't nearly as efficient as heavier sets. So now you have a guy who specializes in that. I would also expect an increase in tempo. I would expect more play action, something Geno was solid at last year. from a surface level, right, we're projecting a tick up in offensive production just from positive variance as well, right? Seattle finished 11th in early down efficiency last year, 4th in EPA per play on early downs the first 3 quarters. The problem was third down and all late downs. Specific to third down, Seattle finished 26th. Late downs all quarters, 21st in EPA per play. So positive variance and a better offensive mind is certainly going to improve that. The other variance area where you'd expect an uptick is red zone. Seattle was bottom 5 in red zone efficiency. So again, late downs, red zone, annually those are the largest variance areas, and we say it every season. Ryan Grubb's transition has a chance to be a little bit easier than other first-time OCs in the NFL. We're projecting Seattle to face a schedule of defenses near the bottom third of the league. And then some of the weapons I've mentioned in passing already, but I like the collective group here. I mentioned Geno thrown deeper. That's going to help DK Metcalf even more. DK finished 7th in air yard share. He's also really good after the catch, 2.1 yards per route run. Grubb specifically talked about JSN's ability to win routes and how he's going to get him favorable matchups. And you look for a receiver that barely ran 4.6, and Njigba finished top 10 in the amount of cushion he was given by defensive backs because his route running is next level, that he embarrasses guys. Even at 32, Tyler Lockett still has some juice. I'm also going to, feels like every single year, be intrigued by what Noah Fant can be. I mean, the talent is, it's so appealing, right? I mean, 6'4", 250, runs 4.5, has like 97th percentile burst agility and catch radius. He's only 26, so Grubb's kind of talked about him in an interesting manner, like super excited about Noah Fant. So we'll see if Grubb can unlock the full potential there. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet feel like a perfect complement to one another as well. Walker there's so many boom plays, right? He forced the 5th most missed tackles among 50 qualifying running backs. The problem is consistency. I mean, Walker tries hitting a grand slam every carry, and it's led to a stuff rate over 20% the first 2 seasons. Charbonnet doesn't have the burst or the athleticism that Walker has, but he hits the hole hard, right? He's got great vision. He runs downhill to the point where Charbonnet's explosive rate was actually higher than Walker's. 15% of Charbonnet's carries went for 10-plus yards. Both are capable out of the backfield, catching the ball. Charbonnet a little bit better in pass protection. That's kind of what earned him a little bit more of that role later in the season. Now, the largest concern either side of the ball, it's along the offensive line. Seattle finished 25th in pass block win rate and were below average, getting push on the ground. You'd expect improvement simply because of health. Seattle had the 7th most injured offensive line last season, but the problem is, you look at 2024 and how it's starting, not much better. Abe Lucas won't be ready for the early part of the season at right tackle. Seattle tried the rest approach last season. It didn't work. Finally had surgery in January, and he's just not ready yet. Now, they planned for this. George Fant is going to start at right tackle, serviceable, but just doesn't have the upside as Lucas. Then you have Anthony Bradford and rookie Christian Haynes battling for the right guard job. Bradford was a matador as a 4th-round rookie last season, 7% pressure rate allowed. He's looked better this preseason, but Haynes is the current regime's draft choice, so let's see how that shakes out. Huge addition, though, at center in Connor Williams, coming off an ACL tear week 14, elite run blocker the last 3 seasons, plus pass protector. The question is just the snaps, right? Moving from guard to center. Some of the snaps are a little bit wild, but as a blocker, still elite. We'll see what it looks like after the ACL tear. Veteran guard in Laken Tomlinson is slotted on the left, has had 2 good seasons in 2020 and 2021. You get back to that form, and it's a solid piece. And then you have left tackle, Charles Cross, 9th pick in 2022, former 5-star recruit. Solid his first 2 seasons. Now he just needs to become elite. And you see Cross manhandle guys some reps. Others, he's getting beat like a drum. 7% pressure rate allowed the last 2 seasons. So the consistency has to be better because there are some elite games and then just pure struggle in others. You follow the camp reports, and Seattle's defensive line for the most part has beat up the offensive line, but as a whole here, Todd, stock arrow up certainly on the Seahawks offense.
Well, you mentioned the defensive line. It provides the perfect segue when we break down what the Seahawks can expect from their stop unit. It's Aiden Durd taking over for Clint Hurd as defensive coordinator. A unique wrinkle there, becomes the first British-born defensive coordinator in league history, Payne. And this is a Seahawks defense that allowed the most total yards per game a season ago at 366.5 and rushing yards in the NFL over the past 2 seasons. They've really struggled in a couple of departments, but there are pieces to be excited about. I mean, Leonard Williams, a big addition last year in the middle of the season, helped generate pressure, allowing the team to finish in the top half of pressure rate and sacks. You look at some of the other players that are there that he's going to be joined by, whether it's Jaron Reed, who wasn't great against the run, but still was able to provide some pressure. They used a first-round draft pick on Byron Murphy. We know what Murphy provided as a big fella in the middle for the Longhorns. Pass rush-wise, look, it's always a mixed bag of sorts. Boye Mafe has to be one of their key contributors. They unfortunately had an injury that we're not sure how long Nwosu could miss some time for the Seahawks in that linebacking core. But overall, Payne, when you look at the Seahawks stop unit, this feels like a group with a defensive-minded head coach and a guy who schemed up some of the better defenses we've seen in the league over the last couple of years in Baltimore, where the stock arrow is only pointing in one direction.
Yes, sorry. I was a little occupied with what's potentially going to start brewing here in the market. Check your text message there.
Will do.
Yeah, Mike Macdonald is one of the most respected modern-day defensive minds. And you just look at the scheme, right? It just does a really good job combating all of the new school offenses, right? Disguised coverages, changing coverage looks, pre and post snap, sim pressures, but not dialing up blitz and leaving, guys exposed on islands, creating a wall in the middle of the field to prevent all of the quick RPO stuff. And you look at McDonald, hasn't really had the most talented defenses either, but at both levels, college and pro, he's improved every single defense he's gotten his hands on. If you look in 2020, Michigan's defense finished just inside the top 40 in efficiency. McDonald shows up in 2021. Michigan finishes top 10. Ravens hire McDonald in 2022 after a down year with Wink Martindale that had the Ravens defense dip all the way to 28th. First year McDonald has the Ravens finish top 10. Year 2 with McDonald, Baltimore surges to number 1 last year in schedule adjusted efficiency. So we have multiple data points that suggest Mike Macdonald's that dude defensively. Seattle finished 28th in schedule adjusted efficiency on defense last year. So with everything I have told you about McDonald, you'd be doing yourself a real disservice if you weren't projecting significant improvement for the Seahawks defense this season. Not to mention, it was probably going to improve through positive variance anyway, right? Similar to the offense. Seattle's defense finished about average on early downs last year, but they were dead last in late down EPA per play surrendered. 6th worst in the red zone. Again, 2 variance areas. Personnel-wise, there's dudes up front, right? And McDonald's system lets guys think less and play faster. Leonard Williams had another solid season, 19th in pass rush win rate among defensive tackles, plus run defender. You have the rookie Byron Murphy, who's had a monster camp. He's apparently been unblockable in one-on-ones. He's requiring multiple defenders at a time. He wants to be coached. And so I think Byron's the X factor inside for Seattle's defense this season. And then there's 3 veterans that round out the group with Jaron Reed, Jonathan Hankins, and Draymond Jones. Jones is a solid piece, 10% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, handful of sacks, single-digit missed tackle rate. The true edge rushers outside are Boye Mafe and Nwosu. Mafe finished 17th in pass rush win rate among edge defenders. Struggles against the run and doesn't tackle well, but he has an elite trait. Nwosu only played 6 games after tearing his pec. In 2022, though, was a 15% pressure rate guy, 10 sacks. Would expect close to that from him again in 2024. They make the trade this morning for Gibson, who you mentioned, who's a nice piece, right? Kind of a money ball signing. Linebacker group was totally revamped, and it is built on stopping new school offenses, right? I mean, linebackers cannot be a total liability in coverage anymore. You got to be able to defend the middle of the field. And if you look in 2023, Seattle was dead last defending running back passes in terms of EPA allowed, bottom 10 in EPA allowed per pass over the middle of the field. So what happens? Tyrell Dotson and Jerome Baker, AFC East linebackers, come all the way west to Seattle. Dotson, 6.6 yards per target allowed, graded out 5th in coverage among 89 qualifiers. Baker, 6.9 yards per target allowed, graded out 18th out of 89 qualifiers in coverage. You bring in a 4th-round rookie, Tyrese Knight out of UTEP. He's had a really nice camp. Just traded for Michael Barrett as well at linebacker for depth purposes because Jerome Baker's been hampered by a little bit of a hamstring injury. So they say he'll be ready for week 1. We'll see how that plays out. But the linebacker group, to me, just built a little bit differently, more scheme fit, more about stopping passes over the middle of the field. Secondary has talented pieces, right? Devin Weatherspoon has a ridiculous rookie campaign, 5.8 yards per target allowed. Only 57% of targets were caught altogether. I have been told that Witherspoon has been dominant all camp. He's a willing tackler. He's a willing blitzer. Julian Love is coming off his best season as a pro. Versatile, willing to move around from deep safety to box safety. Single-digit career missed tackle rate. Only allowed a passer rating in coverage that was very solid last season. Then you have Tariq Woolen. Fantastic in coverage again, 5.4 yards per target allowed, 12 havoc plays created through the air. You don't ask Woolen to help and run support, okay? You just kind of know what he is at this point and let him just go be a ball hawk. Trey Brown heads into year 4, replacement level player. You would hope he has his best season with an elite coach and plenty of personal incentive. Rayshon Jenkins signed in free agency, replacement level veteran safety. Let's monitor that situation. He left practice last week with a lower leg injury. And then you have Kevon Wallace, is Jenkins' replacement if he were to be down for a little bit of a stretch. Wallace had a really nice 7-game stint for the Titans after they claimed him off waivers in October. So, for me, scheme, positive regression in some of the variance areas, revamping some of the talent to fit the scheme. I think this is a stock arrow up defense here, Todd, especially with how they finished on early downs last year.
Very intriguing division. We know that the 49ers, at least the way they're being priced in the market, expect to run away with another division crown, but all 3 teams more than capable of taking a step forward. The Rams, if they can answer questions about offensive continuity and what the defense will look like without Aaron Donald. An Arizona team that offensively should be that much more dynamic and explosive, albeit some questions that have to be answered on the defensive side. And the Seattle Seahawks, who we just broke down in great detail, that could trend up both on the offensive and defensive side with some new coordinators and a new bench boss, with Mike McDonald taking over for Pete Carroll. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things podcast related, pro football, college football, NASCAR, it's all about the Bet the Board podcast feed at Bet the Board Pod. And remind all of you guys and girls again, sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter and make sure that you're checking the spam folders and setting your permissions accordingly. Payne, we've gotten through 7 division previews. I know you tried to temper expectations at the top that we may not have a best bet on each program. We've delivered and then some for 7 shows thus far. Do we make it a perfect 8-pack of best bet opportunities to round out that preseason portfolio before talking week 1 about 10 days from now?
We do, but I'm going to leave it up to you. Over or under?
I mean, you know me, because I come from the same school of thought where you are. We were raised from a very similar coaching tree of sorts, that you always gravitate towards under when given the opportunity between the two.
Okay, so we're going to go under 11.5 wins on the 49ers. There's minus 130 out there, minus 135, minus 140. In that range is all very good, right? We broke them down a little bit earlier. It's time-stamped above, obviously. Just some concern with what might be missing, at least initially in the season, and then some of the track record of injuries that have transpired there. And you just look at Kyle Shanahan, even in a perfect year last year where the offense was just number 1 by a long mile, it's still just a 12-win team. So, I think this makes sense. And then you just look around the division, right? What have we talked about? Not specifically to us, but within the market, the Rams are being bought. Talked at the top, the Cardinals are being bought. All right, we just finished Seattle. We're a little bit higher on them than market. Hint, hint, nod, nod, wink, wink. All of the good stuff. So it's just like what is surrounding San Francisco, whether it's us or someone else. Just think it's improved in this division. So under 11.5 on the old 49ers.
Hey, one other thing, too, that we didn't even mention with the 49ers, they'll work against a schedule that is not exactly the most favorable by any stretch of the imagination either. The 49ers will be at a massive rest disadvantage for a number of their games late in the season. And as we've seen time and time again, regardless of the kind of talent that you have, it's something that wore down Philadelphia. And the 49ers, as you've highlighted, not just this season, but last year as well, not the deepest roster. If they're dealing with any injuries, working at a rest disadvantage, something else that could aid our cause to get things across the finish line.
No, it's very much built on the premium talent, right? There's not a ton of depth, although, a touch better this year. But last year was a team that was actually quite healthy. And so if that regresses, this feels pretty good.
Want to thank all of our loyal listeners, those that have tuned in, whether you've been here just for the NFL divisional previews or you're listening to us for the first time. All the work that goes into preparing all of you heading into the season. It's a labor of love, to say the least. We're all excited about meaningful football starting to take hold. We'll be back with you later this week for the Week 1 College Football Podcast. Shout out to Brad Powers, who did a phenomenal job holding down the fort for Week 0. All three of us will be back on the show. And, rinse and repeat from now until they crown a national champion in college, now until they hand out the Lombardi Trophy in February in New Orleans. The season is officially upon us, Payne. So hopefully you slept plenty during the summer, because we know those hours are hard to come by.
Yeah, that's my hope as well. I don't know if I got enough.
I don't think there's never enough. As Father Time remains undefeated, don't have quite the resilience we did as 25-year-olds. But again, thank you to all of our loyal Bet the Board listeners. Be sure to rate, review, subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast if you haven't already done so. Share the podcast, help spread the gospel. The newsletter, word of mouth, is the most valuable tool we have to continue to grow this podcast and get it in front of more and more football enthusiasts, both of the wagering and the fan variety. So the final word for us on the NFC West, it's all about the San Francisco 49ers win total going under the posted total. And with that ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.